We are in the Jeremiah Bible study once again. Please turn to chapter 22, Jeremiah 22. In this chapter, we're going to be talking a lot about the final kings of Judah, final kings who reigned on the throne of David. Of course, the last king who reigned on the throne of David before the final Babylonian captivity was King Zedekiah. We talked about him last week, but there were really four final kings. If we go back to the last good king on the throne was Josiah. He was a really good king. He was the young king who was there when they found the book of the Lord, maybe Deuteronomy, and they made reforms. And he did a great job of removing all the high places and all the idols from Judah. He did a better job of removing any of those things since the time of David. Solomon created the window for idolatry to come in, essentially to his wives. And it kind of plagued Judah ever since then. Some of it's worse than others. Hezekiah was a pretty good king, but there was a lot of bad ones. Josiah was better than Hezekiah. He did a great job of removing all those idols. We talked about this before, that he even got to the point where he was removing idols at personal residences. One in particular, even the mayor of Jerusalem had idols on his gates to his property, and Josiah even removed those. So he was very fervent. He had zeal for the Lord, and removed the male prostitutes from the temple. It shows just how bad it got, and how much better it got when Josiah was around. It had been really, really, really bad for Josiah. Although the sad thing is, as soon as Josiah dies, it's bad again. So it shows that the people, even though they had good leadership and they followed that leadership during Josiah's life, they hadn't really changed their hearts. They really still longed to seek after other gods and things that needed them, including worshiping Molech in the hidden valley and having a child sacrifice that Jeremiah talks so much about, and how awful that was. So, but in this chapter, we're going to talk about three of those final kings, not really talking about Zechariah, the last one, but we've got, there's a little bit of confusion too, because a lot of these kings have different names, so we'll kind of explain what happened. Josiah died in the place which is going to be Armageddon in times. He was killed by Pharaoh. He did a foolish thing. He went out against Pharaoh when Pharaoh was going up to essentially aid the Assyrians and holding back the Babylonians. Fought and died against Pharaoh and his army. God had promised Josiah that he would hold the Babylonians off, at least during his lifetime. Well, he died, ironically, fighting against the army that God was using to hold back the Babylonians, because the Egyptians weren't as strong when they went up against the Babylonians. Perhaps that's why the Babylonians were able to overcome the Assyrians and the Egyptians so quickly and be able to defeat them and come down and eventually make Judah a vassal state, and then later destroy Jerusalem, carry almost all the people off into captivity. But the people made a guy named Jehoahaz, who's also called Shalom, king, right after Josiah had died. The Pharaoh comes in 3 months later and says, no. Basically, you belong to me now. I own you because I defeated you in battle and you have no army now. So he takes Jehoahaz / Shalom and brings him into exile in Egypt, and this guy ends up dying in Egypt. But Jehoahaz, Shalom wasn't even the firstborn. He was just the one that the people liked. But then Pharaoh puts a guy named Jehoiakim, also called Eliakim, in his place. And after that, though, Nebuchadnezzar goes down to Egypt and kind of puts an end to the ability of Pharaoh to do anything. Um, kind of defeats their army, and I really don't see much from Egypt. Again, after that, I mean, unless you count during Hellenistic periods, but even that's not that's not really Egypt doing it on their own. It's Egypt under a Greek rulership. Once again, becomes powerful. So, but this guy Jehoiakim ends up reigning for a few years, and apparently he's taken by the Babylonians into Babylon. We don't know exactly what to do with him there, but I'm sure they're warning him, hey, you need to basically work for us now and let you live. And he goes back and he rebels against the Babylonians. And all this time, these late rebellions against the Babylonians. So the Babylonians come and say, hey, you have to pay tribute to us. We're the strong people. Sometimes I think that the rebellion, it could be for multiple reasons. It could be the fact that the false prophets are saying everything's going to be okay and they have to believe them. It could be that they hear rumors that Babylon's military is more involved in other places and they're never coming back to Judah. It could also be that they just run out of money. And how much can you tax? Can you tax people enough to be able to run the government and pay the Babylonians what they think they should be paid? And you might just, the economy might not be able to support that. So I think that's why he rebels, and we're going to see Zedekiah also rebels. So the Babylonians come, and Jehoiakim / Eliakim, who was appointed by the Babylonians, or I'm sorry, he was appointed by Pharaoh, but instructed by the Babylonians to play ball with him, gets thrown over the walls by his own advisors. And then they make his son Jehoiakim, who's also called Jeconiah, make him, and he's Josiah's grandson, make him king. He's just a boy. He's only 8 years old. He only reigns for 3 months. Then the Babylonians come back and have another Babylonian exile. That's the second exile. The first one was with Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The second one was with Jehoiakim, or also called Jeconiah. And then they make Zedekiah king, and he's the one we talked about last week. That he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, and finally, when the army was bearing down on him, it was quite clear the false prophets were wrong, that they weren't going to be okay. They finally go to Jeremiah and say, oh, Jeremiah, oh, please, inquire of the Lord for us. Well, it was too late. It was too late at that point. And then Zedekiah has his eyes gouged out, and last thing he sees before his eyes are gouged out is his sons, his heirs being killed. And then we have the final exile. Many people die at that time between pestilence and famine and sword. But some people still go off into captivity at that time. So with that background, trying to keep that in mind, let's go into the text. So chapter 22, thus says the Lord, go down to the house of the king of Judah and there speak this word and say it. Hear the word of the Lord, O king of Judah, you who sit on the throne of David, you and your servants and your people who enter these gates. Thus says the Lord, execute judgment and righteousness and deliver the plundered out of the hand of the oppressor. Do no wrong and do no violence to the stranger, the fatherless, or the widow, nor shed innocent blood in his place. For if you indeed do this thing, then shall enter the gates of this house, riding on horses and chariots, accompanied by servants and people, kings who sit on the throne of David. Earlier in the book of Jeremiah, we saw where Jeremiah was instructed to go to the gates and where the king's going in and out and observe what was going on. So it could be that this is occurring around the same time, or maybe it was from the same scroll that was on that he gave us, and we get some connection there. But this thing about innocence, I believe I've mentioned it before, but I did a study of myself why God chooses to judge nations. And there's three major reasons why God chooses to judge nations. And we're going to see that there's a modification for talking about Israel. Three reasons are for sexual sins, for being harmful towards Israel, and the third one would be for being for not allowing justice, hurting the innocent people, not being helpful to those who can't help themselves in society, orphans and widows. And so by allowing or by participating in child sacrifice in the Hidden Valley, that was one of the worst things that these evil kings of Judah could have possibly done. Yes, did. Messiah stopped it, but afterwards, these last four kings were involved in this child sacrifice and turning a blind eye or actively involved in it themselves. Manasseh sacrificing his own sons, descendants of David, heirs to the throne of David, sacrificing them to evil, false God. It's just incomprehensible. Although, of course, in our nation today, how are we towards the innocent? Abortion. And as babies, who they just say are fetuses or developing tissue, that's human life in the womb. And that's bring some judgment upon us. So we're not doing so good in that category either. We've been pretty good as far as helpful towards Israel. Maybe that's what's caused the United States to be blessed so much up to this point. We're not doing as good as we used to do. As far as sexual sins, we're not doing good in that. I did say there was a modification. If God judges Israel, that second category being harmful or helpful to Israel, because it's reciprocal. But you could add in the idolatry. In the Old Testament, God doesn't really get upset with the Gentiles or the nations for idolatry. He becomes very upset with Israel and with Judah for idolatry because he's a jealous God, because they have the accountability. They know, of course, so many today we have more accountability because we have the New Testament. So we're not doing so great. We're not doing so great. We're doing okay in at least one category. So judgment could be coming from the United States. But this is one of the reasons why I get school are in such a bad position, because they're not keeping righteousness and judgment when it comes to the innocent society. Verse 5. But if you will not hear these words, I swear by myself, says the Lord, that this house shall become a desolation. This house could actually be here. The temple, and also the dynasty. Verse 6. For thus says the Lord to the house of the king of Judah, you are Gilead to me, the head of Lebanon, yet I surely will make you a wilderness, cities which are not inhabited. Gilead and Lebanon are beautiful places. It's not Lebanon like we think of today as the nation of Lebanon. It's not talking about that, although it's, it's kind of that area. The word Lebanon means white. And so it's this area of these white-capped mountains that you can see from Israel, which is close to roughly where Lebanon is today. So think of the equivalent. If you live in Colorado, think of the Rockies, or if you live here in Nevada, the Sierra Nevadas. It's a beautiful place that you see those beautiful mountains off in the distance. That's what God is saying, is that Lebanon, you were like Lebanon to me, a beautiful place. Gilead, also hill country, beautiful place. In the Song of Solomon, it's like goats descending Gilead. Verse 7, I will prepare destroyers against you, everyone with its weapons. They shall cut down your choice cedars and cast them into the fire. We're continuing the theme of Lebanon. If you look at the Lebanese flag today, there's a cedar tree on it. Cedar trees were associated with that area. They grow on these mountains by where they could see the white caps. And when they built the temple, that's what Solomon used. He used cedars from King Hiram, the Phoenician king who lived up there. Um, um, so we have this dual sense of house of Judah and the house of God, and that also was in 2 Samuel 7. Um, David wanted to build a house for God. God essentially responded and said, "You're not going to build a house for me. Your son will. Your son will build something for me. I'm going to build a house for you." So we have a play on that earlier play from 2 Samuel 7. Verse 8, and many nations will pass by the city, and everyone will say to his neighbor, why has the Lord done so to this great city? And they will answer, because they have forsaken the covenant of the Lord their God and worshipped other gods and served them. Weep not for the dead, nor bemoan him. Weep bitterly for him that goes away, for he shall return no more, nor see his native country. Two major reasons why this judgment is coming. And it's because of how they acted towards the innocent, and because of the idolatry that they had. So, if we put that in the category of the sexual sins, that was going on also. Certainly during the time of Manasseh, if all the worshiping false gods came back after Josiah, we can imagine a lot of prostitution probably also came back. Verse 11, for thus says the Lord concerning Shallum, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, who reigned instead of Josiah's father, who went from his place. He shall not return there anymore, but he shall die in the place where they have led him captive, and shall see this land alone. So this is that first king who reigned after Josiah, the people's choice, not the firstborn son, but the people's choice. They loved this guy, Shallum. He's also called Jehoahaz, and they made him king. And Pharaoh comes and says, I'm going to choose who's king. I basically am. So that's what this is talking about. He shall not return here anymore. He shall die in the place where they have led him captive, and shall see the land no more. So that's talking about what's going to happen to that first king. And by the way, this chapter really shows how Jeremiah is not in chronological order, because we're going to show these three kings back to back here within one chapter. So we're spanning a lot of time here in this particular chapter. This next part, it's actually not clear as to which king we're talking about, because we just talked about Shallum. And then in verse 18, we're going to skip over to Jehoiakim, and that's Jehoahaz's brother, also Josiah's son, the one who Pharaoh makes king in the place of Shallum. And so we're not sure if these verses 13 through 17 refer back up to Shallum or back down to Jehoiakim, but either way, the significance is here, and it connects us back to this idea of the cedars in Lebanon. Remember I said that God said, David, you're not going to build a house for me. Let me back up. There was some more context. Before God had said, David, you're not going to build a house for me. 2 Samuel 7. It all starts out with David finally had peace on all sides. And he said, wow, I'm living in this big house of cedar. But the Lord's still living in a tent. And I need to build a house for God. So we're going to have righteous David, righteous, in the sense that his heart was in the right place. How he loved God. Sin with Bathsheba was terrible, but we're not talking about that. Righteous David wants to build a house for God. God says, no, you've shed too much. We're not going to build a house for you. Solomon, your son, will build a house for you. Yeah. So I'm going to build a house for you, meaning a dynasty. So now we have one of these sons of the good King Josiah, also a descendant of David, needs to build a house for himself. It's almost like the reverse of David's story. You know, David saying, I have this great house of cedar. And it's not great. There's a discrepancy. God should have a nice house of cedar. This is a descendant of David saying, I need a house of cedar. And it's not clear as to whether this is said Jehoahaz Shalom or Jehoiakim Eliakim, but let's read what it says. Verse 13. Woe to him who builds his house by unrighteousness, and his chambers by injustice, who uses his neighbor's service without wages and gives him nothing for his work. Remember I talked about how they're paying tribute to Babylon? Well, they have no money to pay workers. So essentially he just forces them, the people there, to labor on his behalf. This kind of reminds me of Solomon as well. Solomon was given the option when he became king. Are you going to be as rough on the people as David was, or are you going to ease things up? And the wise people will answer, make it easy on the people. Lighten the yoke, lighten the burden. But his friends said, oh, no. You need to make it even harder. Because he listened to his friends, that's why the nation split into Israel in the north and Judah in the south. So that was kind of the start of all this trouble. And it's happening again. He's forcing people to work upon a house for himself, whoever this king is. Verse 14, who says, I will build myself a wide house with spacious chambers and cut out windows for it, paneling it with cedar and painting it with vermilion. The country was pretty successful when Josiah was king. The Assyrians had been a problem, but they no longer were burdensome towards Judah. They were no longer trying to tax Judah. The Egyptians weren't really a problem, and they had prosperity. They had prosperity because the angel of the Lord had wiped out the Assyrian army, and that allowed Josiah's time to be a very successful, prosperous time. They even regained a lot of the land of the northern kingdom of Israel at this time. So I'm not surprised that he was able to import a bunch of cedar and probably had lumber yards of cedar. Well, this is one of Josiah's sons saying, oh, this is great. You know, I might not have any money, but I've got all the cedar, so at least I can build myself a nice house to console myself that there's no money. And I'll just force the people to work. Verse 15, shall you reign because you enclose yourself in cedar? Did not your father eat and drink and do justice and righteousness? And it was well with him. He judged the cause of the poor and needy, and it was well. Was not this knowing me, says the Lord? And I believe this is referencing back to the oppressing that they were doing. Verse 3, let me read that again. Thus says the Lord, execute judgment and righteous, and deliver the plundered out of the hand of the oppressor. Do no wrong and do no violence to the stranger, the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place. He's not executing judgment. His father did, but he's concerned about building a nice house for himself. Verse 17, let your eyes and your heart are for nothing but your covetousness, for shedding innocent blood and practicing oppression and violence. Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. This is why people would say it's actually Jehoiakim that those previous verses were talking about. So thus says the Lord. They shall not lament for him, saying, alas, my brother, or alas, my sister. They shall not lament for him, saying, alas, master, or alas, his glory. He shall be buried with the burial of a donkey, dragged and cast out beyond the gates of Jerusalem. This is the one that I said. The Babylonians come to the wall, and his advisors throw him over the wall. Like, okay, we know what you're here for. Here, take him, leave the city alone. And so he's dragged off, and whatever that means, the barrel of the donkey, that's what happens to him. Verse 20, go up to Lebanon and cry out, and lift your voice in Bashan. Cry from Abarim, for all your lovers are destroyed. Here we go back to our theme of Lebanon. We mentioned Gilead, that was one of the high places, but now another high place. Bashan, another beautiful place. Gilead was known for its goats. Bashan, which is modern day Golan Heights, was known for its cattle. Another place in the prophets, the people are called cows of Bashan because they're loaded and fat and living things up. We're just using this kind of hill country motif. You know, if we were doing it today, we might think of like Sound of Music, like the Alps, or like I said, the Rockies, just this beautiful place where crisp, clear water runs down. Go up there and cry out. All your lovers have been destroyed. The false gods were notoriously placed in high places. And these lovers that they have, these false gods, are destroyed. Verse 21, I spoke to you in your prosperity, but you said, I will not hear. This has been your manna from your youth, that you did not obey my voice. The wind shall eat up all your rulers, and your lovers shall go into captivity. Surely then you will be ashamed and humiliated for all your wickedness. Not only do the actual idols themselves go into captivity, I mean, Babylonians are taking anything that they think might have any kind of the people of the other nations that exported those false gods. Sometimes they're called the lovers of Israel and Judah too. They're all taken into captivity. The Babylonians aren't just going after Judah. They're going after all these nations around. We'll get more into that when we get a few chapters in Jeremiah. Verse 23, O inhabitant of Lebanon, making your nest in the cedars, how gracious will you be when pangs come upon you, like the pain. Verse 24, as I live, says the Lord, though Coniah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, with a signet on my right hand, yet I would pluck you off. So here we're, like I said, we're jumping through time. We're all the way up to the time now of Jehoiakim, and this is, Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim. This is the grandson of Josiah. This is also named Jehoiakim or Jeconiah. God doesn't call him Jeconiah, he calls him Conan. A lot of these Bible names that have Je in them, that's God's name. You might say Jehovah. But God's name was not actually pronounced with the J sound. This just happens to do with things being translated. The European languages where Y and J can be changed. Just taking a word for these J's, usually reference back to Yahweh's name. And so God's saying, you're such a wicked king, I'm taking my name. Though Coniah, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, with a signet on my right hand, that I would pluck you. The king really needs a signet because that's what he uses to stamp things with royal decrees. God would throw him away if he was a sinner. Verse 25, and I will give you into the hand of those who seek your life, and into the hand of those whose face you fear, the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and the hand of the Chaldeans. So I will cast you out, and your mother who bore you, into another country where you were not born, and there you shall die. But to the land in which they desire to return, there they shall not return. Is this man Coniah a despised, broken idol, a vessel in which no pleasure? Why are they cast out? He and his descendants, and cast into a land where they do. O earth, 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 hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, and this is important. Write this man down as childless, a man who shall not prosper in his days, for none of his descendants shall prosper, sitting on the throne of David and ruling any more. Why is this so important? Well, because Jehoahaz / Shalom, he dies in Egypt. and his descendants with him. Jehoiakim gets thrown over the walls. His descendants also end up dying out. Zedekiah, all his sons get killed right before he has his eyes blotted out. Jeconiah actually ends up prospering then. He gets married, he has a family. His descendants make it back into Judah. They multiply. One of their descendants is Joseph of Nazareth. But here we have, he's cursed. None of Coniah's kids can ever sit on the throne. But the only descendants that have been through this whole line of kings in Judah that can be king, let's say the legal line, have to come now from Jeconiah. So how can this be? No, answer is Mary. If you follow her genealogy, which I believe Luke shows Mary's genealogy, or Jesus' genealogy through Mary, and the Gospel of Matthew shows the genealogy of Jesus through Joseph, shows that Joseph is a descendant of Jeconiah, and Mary is not. She is from another line, a different descendant of David. And so that's how we're going to solve this issue of the curse. And that's why only Jesus could be the king / Messiah. He fits the legal requirement through his adopted father, Joseph. The biological requirement, he meets through his mother. We'll talk about this more next week. Thank you so much.